Welcome to Introduction to Honeybees, the Honeybee Handbook with Mel Gadd. It's my pleasure to have you all in this room tonight, or this morning. Before we get started, we're going to go through a couple of slides here. During our conference, you will see this slide up several times in a way to acknowledge and remember that we are occupying land that was previously inhabited long before European colonization. And as our work as a land-based organization, we want to encourage you all to learn more about the folks who inhabited the land prior to European colonization and are still here today. And you can learn more about their current organizations by following some of these links and that you will find here at nativeland.ca. As well, brief etiquette, we will admit you as you come in and you will be put on mute. And we ask that during the presentation that you remain on mute, just to preserve sound quality for everyone. As well, we are encouraging you to use the chat feature to ask questions. And during portions of the event, we may ask you to come off of mute to ask those questions. Just let us know that you have a question. You can put them into the chat section there. And we're a small enough group where I think it'll be a nice, a nice conversation. As well, we want to remind you that this is being recorded and it will be available for everyone on our YouTube channel. We, of course, want to thank our sponsors who have made all of our work possible. I encourage you to look them, seek them out and learn more about their products and services. They're doing some really great work. So again, we thank you all for supporting our sponsors and we thank all of our sponsors. Of course, we want to thank you and make sure that you're having a great experience. There's an online auction and we have some really amazing products and it's a great time to check that out in between our workshops. So I will drop that link and some other links along in a couple of minutes and again at the end, so you can check those out in between sessions. So at and some more of our virtual vendors here where you can check these out as well. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Mel. Mel has been a beekeeper for over 16 years, involved with the Essex County Beekeepers Association and keeping bees in eastern Massachusetts. He was the chair of the Essex County Beekeepers Association Bee School in 2015 and oversees major beekeeping program at Drumlin Farm Wildlife Sanctuary, as well as teaching about bees in numerous programs, including Bee School, which is a 5-week introduction to beekeeping. And Mel has been involved with using some non-traditional types of hives, including top bar, Warre hives, Slovinian hives, Valkyrie Horizontal hives, as well as the traditional Langstroth hive. As part of his work at Drumlin Farm, Mel has been conducting experiments with natural approaches to dealing with the problems of the bees. Mel was named Beekeeper of the Year in 2017 by the Massachusetts Beekeepers Association. Thanks for joining us, Mel.
Thanks for everybody joining the talk. And I just will, hopefully everybody can see this. And I'm just gonna run right into it. And people are welcome to ask questions as we go along. I find that sometimes that's a little easier, especially if there's something on one of the slides that you really want to have more information about. So as the introduction said, I've been keeping bees for about 16 years. I kind of got hooked fairly quickly when I first started. And I've just been expanding how much I'm doing. At the end of my talk, there's a little video of almost a virtual tour of some of the stuff we're doing out at Drumlin. Drumlin has really been a great place for me to run the beekeeping program. It's not an organic farm, but they do not use any chemicals. It's more sustainable. And so we do not use any chemicals on the bees for any of the problems that they have. And again, we've been doing a lot of research out at the farm on some natural approaches to beekeeping and dealing with some of the problems. And over the years, I've given some of that talk at some of the other conferences. So this is really an introductory class or talk about honeybees and what they do. So what I usually do is I start with a little musical interlude to get you into the mood. And the only thing I preface is this is not me singing. Okay.
Sing a song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Bees by the thousand, they are working together, bringing nectar and pollen. Whatever the weather, I gotta keep the queen fed, laying 2 eggs a minute. For the next generation, the sky's the limit. Oh, evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seed. We pop off the top tubes, let the brood, white larvae and eggs mean that things are all good. We try to avoid the end with the stinger, but every now and then we still get stung on the finger, stung on the finger. Put some ice on that sting, cool down the burn, easing the suffering. Got Varroa and Nosema and no tracheal mites. It's a mess with all these pests, we might just give up the fight. But no disease will kill my bees, cause I take care of my hive. And through the winter into April, they will still be alive. Still be alive, my bees are alive. Summer hauling in the honey like a beast, and then in August we'll collect it and we'll have a great feast with lots of meat and pie and honeycomb and cookies too. And we'll still have enough to give honey to you, honey to you. Sing a song of the bees, thousands as one, led by a queen. Co-evolution we see, flowers and bees, nectar for fertile seed.
So before we, I hope this has gotten you into the mood to learn about bees. Before I move on from this picture on the screen right now, if you look almost to the little left to the middle, you'll see a bee with a yellow dot on her. That is the queen, the mother of all the bees in the hive. She's the largest of them, which we'll talk about. And I just wanted to say that that dot has been placed on that queen by the whoever bred her or by the beekeeper, and it serves a number of purposes. One, it makes it easier to find her, and especially when there are observation hives and there are exhibits, it's easier for people to see her. That dot also lets the beekeeper know when she was born. There is a whole color coding system for queens, and every year the color changes. The queen can live anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Some beekeepers like to replace their queen every 2 years to ensure that her production stays up. Some of us let the hive replace her as she gets old. And we will move on. Okay.
Jan asks, what is that dot?
It's just a little, it's either nail polish or a little paint that the beekeeper has placed on her. They now make markers that are permanent that will go on, that they'll put that color on. And again, it lets us know how old she is, in effect. And for new beekeepers especially, it makes it easier to find the queen, because as you'll see in some of the pictures later, when there are a lot of bees in there, it's kind of hard to find her. And you get 10 beekeepers in the room, you're going to get 30 opinions. If I do an inspection on my hives and I see that everything is going fine, I don't bother trying to find the queen. Whereas some people will always try to find their queen. Okay. Honeybees are the original immigrants to this country. They are not native. In effect, they're an invasive species. Luckily, it's one of those invasive species we're not willing to get rid of. They were brought over by the Pilgrims. There are over 5,000 native bees in this country. And native bees are much better pollinators than honeybees. The issue is that native bees are harder for beekeepers to raise, and honeybees are easier, and the numbers are just much greater. So they do more of the pollinating of the crops than the native bees. Native bees tend to be specialists, and there's a little video in here that really goes through the difference between generalist and specialist. Honeybees are generalists. Okay. All of the bees originally developed millions of years ago from a particular type of wasp. Wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets I basically call meat eaters because they like to eat meat, and so they also will eat pollen and nectar. When there's no pollen and nectar around, they will go after the bees. And climate change is starting to affect us with respect to that, which I'll talk a little bit more later. So here's a bumblebee. Bumblebees are native. Bumblebees are one of the major sources for pollinating tomatoes because they're considered what they call a buzz pollinator. Honeybees can't. If everybody who's seen a tomato flower, it's very hard for a honeybee to get into that flower. Bumblebees attach themselves to that flower and buzz. So that's why they're called buzz pollinators. And they will buzz and vibrate that flower until the flower opens up and releases the pollen. But I call them the teddy bear of the bee world. Okay. Right. So I'm going to play this little video, and it really goes through the importance of all of the pollinators.
Bees are very busy little matchmakers, wingmen in every sense of the word. You see, the bees' side of the whole birds and the bees business is to help plants find mates and reproduce. In their work as pollinators, honeybees are integral to the production of nearly 1/3 of the food that we eat. And these bees, dutifully helping lonely plants have sex, aren't alone, but rather are part of a very complex network of matchmaking creatures, critical for the pollination of natural ecosystems and crops. Plants in many natural ecosystems need help to have sex. Like many of us, they're too busy to find a relationship. They have too much photosynthesis to do, and they can't find the time to evolve feet and walk to a singles bar. Those places are called meat markets for a reason, because plants can't walk. So they need matchmaker pollinators to transport their pollen grains to flowers of the same plant species, and they pay these pollinators with food. Today, around 170,000 plant species receive pollination services from more than 200,000 pollinator species. Pollinators include many species of bees, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps, beetles, even birds and bats, who together help pollinate many species of trees, shrubs, and other flowering plants. In return, flowering plants are an abundant and diverse food source for pollinators. For instance, fossil records suggest bees may have evolved from wasps that gave up hunting after they acquired a taste for nectar. Plant pollinator networks are everywhere. Ecologists record these networks in the field by observing which pollinators visit which plants, or by analyzing the identity of pollen loads on their bodies. Networks registered in these ways contain from 20 to 800 species. These networks show a repeated structure or architecture. Pollinators interact with plants in a very heterogeneous way. Most plants are specialists. They have only one or a few matchmakers. Meanwhile, only a few generalist plants hire a diverse team of matchmakers, getting visits from almost all the pollinators of the network. The same occurs with pollinators. Most are specialists that feed on only a few plant species, while a few pollinators, including the honeybee usually, are generalists, busily feeding from and matchmaking for almost all the plant species in that ecosystem. What's interesting is that specialists and generalists across both plants and pollinators sort themselves out in a particular pattern. Most pollinator networks for which we have data are nested. In a nested network, specialists tend to interact more with generalists than with other specialists. This is because if you're a specialist plant and your only matchmaker also specializes on you as its only food source, you're each more vulnerable to extinction. So you're better off specializing on a generalist pollinator that has other sources of food to ensure its persistence in bad years. The same goes if you're a specialist pollinator. You're better off in the long run specializing on a generalist plant that gets pollinated by other species in times when you're not around to help. Finally, in addition to nestedness, the networks are usually modular. This means that the species in a network are compartmentalized into modules of plants and animals that interact more with each other than with species in other modules. Think of them like social cliques. A plant or pollinator dying off will affect the species in its module, but those effects will be less severe on the rest of the network. Why is all that important? Because plant pollinator network structure affects the stability of ecosystems. Heterogeneous distribution, nestedness, and modularity enable networks to better prevent and respond to extinctions. That's critical because nature is never static. Some species may not show up every year. Plants flower at different times. Pollinators mature on varying schedules. Generalist pollinators have to adapt their preferences depending on who's flowering when. So from one flowering season to the next, the participants and patterns of matchmaking can drastically change. With all those variables, you can understand the importance of generalist pollinators like bees to the stability of not only a crop harvest, but the entire network of plants and pollinators we see in nature and rely on for life. Next time you see a bee fly by, remember that it belongs to a complex network of matchmakers, critical to the love lives of plants all around you.
So that really is a good description about, as I said, that honeybees are really considered generalists, and a lot of the native bees are specialists. So like there's a blueberry bee that only really pollinates the blueberries, though honeybees will also pollinate. The native bees who are specialists actually pollinate at a higher rate than the generalist pollinators, but we need them all. Okay. So specifically about honeybees, there are 3 types of bees in the hive. One being the queen, and there's only one queen and one queen only. If there's more than one queen by accident, the 2 of them will seek each other out and fight to the death. The queen is really a queen in name only. It's not like Queen Elizabeth before the Parliament system came into effect, where she made all the decisions. The only decisions the queen gets to make in the hive is whether or not an egg she lays is going to be a male which is called a drone, or a worker bee, a female. Worker bees are fertilized, male bees are not. But that's all she does. And during the season, which used to be from end of January until beginning of October, she will lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. With climate change and how our winters have been much warmer, she's generally starting to lay in early January, and it's stretching into late October. But again, that's all she does. She doesn't feed herself or clean herself. The worker bees take care of her. The second bee in the hive is the drone, which is on the bottom right. And as you can see, it has kind of a rounded rear end. Drones do not have stingers. They are considered lazy, and they have one purpose and one purpose only. They will fly off, and drones from all the different hives and locations will start collecting at a spot up 30 feet in the air, usually, that they call a drone collection area. I call it the drone singles bar. And they hang out there waiting for a virgin queen to come flying by. And that virgin queen will release a pheromone, which is like a perfume smell, that says to the guys, here I am, try and catch me and mate. 1% of the males are able to catch up with her and mate. They have a few seconds of fun, so to speak. And then their privates remain inside her. And as they go to pull out and fly away, it rips their insides out and they die. I think a lot of people know that in the insect world, that's pretty standard, that when a female mates with a male, the result is at the end, the male dies. The best example is praying mantises. When a praying mantis female and male mate, when they're done, the female bites his head off. So it's like almost to hide the evidence or something. Male bees do nothing else. During the season when they're needed for mating purposes, the worker bees will feed them and clean them. But come October, when the hive is getting ready for winter, you can stand in front of the beehives and watch the worker bees push the males out and not let them back in. And since they don't know how to feed themselves and don't know how to clean themselves, they either will starve to death or they will freeze to death. But basically, the worker bees' attitude is, you've done nothing to bring food into the hive. You've done nothing to clean the hive. We're not going to share our scarce, what we consider scarce resources with you so you survive through the winter. And then come the spring, the queen will start laying eggs that will turn into male bees based on how much is needed. The major bee in the hive is the worker bee, and they are all female. So it is a female-dominated society. They're the ones who really make all the decisions about the hive, but they do all the work. So what they'll do is each worker bee will do every job in the hive. So as they age, they move on to the next job. It's not like us where we might do 1 or 2 or 3 jobs in our lifetime. The worker bee will do every job that the bee does. And there's a slide later on that really shows that. At the height of the summer, there will be up to 60,000 bees in the hive. And that number will decrease as we go into the fall, and it starts lower and then it gets up to 60 to 70,000 and then we'll go down. The last job the worker bee does is they go out foraging, where they collect the pollen and the nectar, and then start to process that and convert it. Okay. This is just the anatomy of a bee. Bees have two stomachs or two crops, depends on how you want to call it. They have a regular stomach like ours that processes their food that they eat, and the honey stomach where they take the nectar from the flower. And flowers produce nectar for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to attract the pollinators. If they didn't produce that nectar, the pollinators more than likely would not go to them. And nectar is a mixture of water and some compound sugars. And what happens is the bee will drink that up through something we call a proboscis, which is kind of like a tongue and a straw. And they put it into the honey stomach where it's mixed with an enzyme that starts to break down that nectar into primarily fructose and sucrose. And then that bee will fly back to the hive and transfer it to a worker bee in the hive, who then will again do a little more processing with some enzyme. And then they put it into the honeycomb cells. And then they dehydrate it. Now, when it first goes in, it probably has 60 to 70% water in it. And by the time they dehydrate it by flapping their wings and pushing air across the cells, which vaporizes the water and takes it out, when it's 17% or less water content, it then is converted into honey. And then the bees will put a wax capping on it that they produce out of cells in their body, and to keep it fresh. And when they're hungry and they need that and the honey is their carbohydrate source, they will then open that cell and drink the honey. Now, what's always fascinating to me is how the bees know that it's 17% or less water, so they cap it. It just must be in their DNA. It's not like there's a little scientist bee running around, saying, oh, this one's 17, cap it. Out at the farm, whenever I capture our honey, I always test the honey, and it's always 17% or less moisture. And I also will take some of the nectar that's in the cells that's not capped yet, and it's always more than 17%. So the bees are very smart, basically. The only other thing I'll point out on this is if you look at the antenna on the left, one of the ways to tell the difference between basically a honeybee and a yellow jacket, because a lot of people confuse the two, is honeybees and other native bees have bent antenna. So if you look at their antenna, you can see that there is a bend in it. Yellow jackets, wasps, and hornets all have straight antenna. And so that's one of the quick ways to tell the difference. Now, most people will at times confuse yellow jackets and honeybees. So that's an easy way to tell the difference. Here's a picture of a regular bee. And again, you can see the bent antenna. And we're just going to run through the different sections of the bee: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Bees have 6 legs, 3 on each side. If you look at that large leg on the left-hand side, and the bigger joint is called the pollen basket, and that's where the bees will collect the pollen from the plants that they go to. The bees have 4 wings, 2 on each side, and the 2 on each side hook together. And when you put it under a microscope, it really looks like Velcro. If anybody's looked at how Velcro works, one side is kind of little circles or eyelets, and the other side is like a hook, and they hook together. So my assumption is the guy who invented Velcro studied bees. At least that's my guess. Okay. And so there are the 3 pairs of segmented legs on each side and the antenna. Oops. All right. So again, this is a picture of the bees in the hive. That one in the middle which you can see is much larger than the others, is the queen. And she's going from cell to cell laying eggs. And the other bees are just, there are attendant bees that are feeding her and cleaning her, and then attending to the eggs that she's laid. Queen lays an egg. It then turns into a larva. And then that larva turns into a pupae, which then the cell is capped with wax after having some food put in it. And then the pupae will then metamorphose into a bee, similar to how a caterpillar makes a cocoon and then slowly turns itself into a butterfly. I'm just going to run through these quickly since it just explains it. And if you look in this picture, the cells really show, you can look in the cells and see the larva developing. If you look closely, you'll see some bee eggs. Bee eggs are not like chicken eggs. They're like a tiny, very tiny little worm. And the bees working there are really taking care of those and working to keep them going. Again, the queen bee is larger. And again, all she does is lay eggs. And there she is again. And if you look at her bottom, at her rear, you can see an egg being pushed out. And again, she'll lay up to 2,000 eggs every day during the season. So in her lifetime, she will probably lay over 500,000 eggs. And queens can live anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Some beekeepers like replacing her every 2 years because as we age, we slow down. So does the queen. So after 2 years, they feel they want to make sure that the hive continues to grow at its regular rate. So they will replace the queen. Some of us who are more natural beekeepers will let the hive replace her when they're ready to do that. When the queen gets older and the bees go to replace her, they will, it's not like they say to one of the worker bees, now you're the queen. They will take eggs that she has laid within 48 hours. At least that's the prime period that you really want them to use. And they're smart enough to know, just like unfortunately sometimes people's pregnancies don't work and they lose the baby. If they were to only start one queen and they have to increase the size of the cell to raise that queen because she's so much bigger than the regular bees, and that's a queen cell in the middle, they only started one and it didn't work, they're going to be out of luck. The hive is eventually going to die. So they will start anywhere from 5 to 10 queen cells. And then the first queen that is born will seek out those other queens, those other cells, and put her stinger in there and kill those queens. Because again, you only can have one. Now, some of us take advantage of that process and will remove those queen cells to raise separate queens to use in other hives. But that's a whole talk on its own. Again, there's the male bee, and their whole purpose, their eyes are much bigger so that they can see the virgin queen flying around and try and catch her. And again, all they do is mate with a queen. Okay, so if you look at this picture, you can see, you look in those cells and you could, the little white dot in the middle are the eggs, and the bees are working and helping to feed them and take care of those so that they will develop. Okay. Stinging. Honeybees get blamed for most people getting stung. And the reality is most people who are stung by yellow jackets, wasps, and hornets. Yellow jackets, wasps, and hornets all have straight stingers. There's And they can continuously sting you. And at times they will sting you for no reason. Honeybees stinger, and it's hard to see, but the end of the stinger has little barbs on the end that are similar to a fishing hook. And when they sting you and they go to fly away, the stinger and the venom sac generally gets ripped out of their body and they die. Honeybees will only sting you if you threaten them or their family. So they're willing to sacrifice their life for protecting the family, the hive and all the other members. They don't want to sting you because I think they know they die. But again, to protect the whole, they will sting you. 1% of the population is seriously allergic to insect stings. Most people who are seriously allergic know it and will carry a EpiPen. If you don't know you're allergic, seriously allergic, and you get stung by any insect or a honeybee, and you start to have breathing problems, you truly need to get to the hospital or emergency room fairly quickly. And again, if you know, you'll have an EpiPen and be able to inject epinephrine into your system. That'll help you breathe. But again, they only will sting you if you threaten them. Now, any beekeeper that tells you they never get stung is full of it. It's the bee's way of letting me know I'm not doing something correctly and I'm annoying them. And I get stung periodically. Luckily, I'm not allergic at this stage. Some people, the more they get stung, the less reaction they have. Some people, the more they get stung, they start to get more, they have bigger reactions. So far, I've been lucky and I basically don't get a reaction. The only place I don't like getting stung is in my face. And again, when I do something wrong, or I go into the hive at the wrong time and antagonize them, I will get stung. Now, because of the crazy weather we have had recently, where we've had a lot of rain, and we've had a lot of electrical storms, the bees have been much more agitated than they normally are. And there have been a number of problems with some hives that people have because of the bees being more agitated because of all the static electricity in the air. And it has caused some problems. I mentor a lot of people who have taken our bee class, and I get calls all the time, and they think that their bees are so aggressive that they need to go through a process to replace the queen to change that attitude. And what some of us are now telling people is wait until the weather gets better and some of that static electricity that's been in the air so much dissipates, and you'll find that your bees will calm down. We have a huge observation hive at Drumlin Farm that I've never had problems with. And I was teaching a camp group a couple of weeks ago on a Tuesday, and there were 30 to 40,000 bees in the observation hive. And I came in on Thursday to teach another camp group, and they were gone. They had left. They had what we call absconded. And after doing some research and studying, we've determined that they left because of all the electricity generated through these electrical storms we've had in the air. They were really upset, so they left and went off somewhere else. And hopefully there's somewhere in a tree in the woods. And, you know, it's upsetting, but, you know, when they're not happy, they will leave. This is a standard Langstroth hive, which most people are familiar with. They have frames in them that you can remove. And the big commercial beekeepers who move their hives around the country will move thousands of hives like this to the fields to pollinate people's farm, the crops in the fields. Some of us feel that's partly a problem. That's caused some of the problems with the bees, especially when they're going to these big commercial farms where they're doing monocropping. I don't really call it monocropping. I call it clear-cut farming, where they clear out everything. So the diversity of the food source out there for the pollinators is down to one plant and one plant only. And because so many of them use so many chemicals, the bees are ingesting it and the other pollinators are ingesting it and weakening their stamina. Colony collapse, some of the studies basically have shown between the lack of diversity of food source and all the chemicals in the plants that the bees are ingesting, they've gotten dementia and they can't find their way back to their hives, which is unfortunate. This is just a little, as I talked earlier about how every bee does, worker bee does every job in the hive. This goes through from the bee being, the egg being laid, the bee coming out, and the first job they do when they come out is they become cleaners, where they clean over the cells where they were born from. They become nurse bees, taking care of the new bees. They become attendants to the queen. And then they'll become worker bees in the hive, where they take the pollen and nectar from the foraging bees and will put it into the cells, and then they'll dehydrate it and cap it. They become guard bees as one of the last things they do in the hive, where each queen in every hive will spray a pheromone very specific to her across all the bees in the hive. And those bees, that identifies them as belonging to her family. So the guard bees, when foraging bees come back, if they don't smell her smell on them, they will not let those bees in. So sometimes if you have hives near each other, sometimes a bee from one hive will drift and kind of mess up its location, so to speak, and drift into that other hive, and that guard bee will not let them in. And again, the last job that they do is they're out foraging, and the bees basically will die when they're out foraging because they aged out and they're kind of run out of energy, and they kind of go down like an airplane that runs out of gas. Okay. This is the inside of a Langstroth hive, and they all work cooperatively together. And you can see this is a fairly healthy hive. And when a beekeeper inspects the hives, he's looking to see that the bees are doing their job, that there are no disease issues or other problems that the bees end up having, and that the queen is laying her eggs. So here you can see on the right-hand side, you can look in and see larvae in the cells, and the bees kind of taking care of them. On the left-hand side, you can see cappings over some of those cells where there were larvae that turned into pupae. And once they start to convert themselves into bees, the cell is capped. And then when the bee is ready to be born, they will cut through that wax and come through. Now, bees use wax cappings over different cells for different things. So when they're covering over what we call brood, the babies in effect, you can see it's kind of a little rounded and a little darker color. When they cap over honey cells, it's almost a clear or white and flat capping. So when a beekeeper pulls the frames out, he can tell what's going on in the hive. Again, this is just another, there's a queen with her butt in the cell, getting ready to lay eggs. Drones do not have stingers. And you can see it has a rounded butt. And so if you find a drone and know it's a drone, you can take it in your hand and pet it or whatever. It's not going to sting you. Again, when in a hive of 60,000, you have one queen, somewhere around 500 male bees, drones, and the rest are all females, worker bees. And again, they run the show. So when the bees collect the pollen, they will mix it with a little nectar and honey, and they turn it into what we call bee bread. And bee bread is, and they store it into the cells. Now, some beekeepers can hold the frame up to the sun and look and see the pollen, the bee bread stored, and they can tell you from the color of the pollen what flower that pollen came from. Some of us can't do that who are very colorblind, but the pollen becomes the bee's protein source. So just like the honey is their carbohydrate, they also need protein. In addition, they need, as we do, they need water. So they will store water in some of the cells, and they use it, one, to drink for themselves, and they also will use it to cool the hive down. So they will have a bunch of bees inside flapping their wings, pushing air across, and vaporize that water so that the vapor then cools the hive down. So it's the bees' form of air conditioning. It's, you know, they're just very smart. They've kind of worked things out over all of these years. And these are just bees feeding the larvae before they're getting ready to cap the cells. And there is nectar. And again, they will dehydrate that nectar. Now, the cell structure is a hexagon. And again, this shows you how smart they are. Bees produce the wax that makes those cells. Wax takes a lot of energy on the bee's part to create it. And so they picked the hexagon, one, because it's the queen has space to lay her eggs and they can store their honey and pollen, but it uses the least amount of beeswax to create this cell structure because each cell shares walls with other cells. Now, if they were to use circles, you would end up, and place those all together, you would end up with a lot of wasted space. So over the millions of years, they really came up with this as the best approach. And so this is a video of a top bar hive, but what I'm trying to show you is how they work cooperatively to build out the wax, the cell structure. It happens to be to the flight of the bumblebee. It's just amazing to me how perfect that cell structure is size-wise, and how they work cooperatively to create it. So what I mentioned before, when they cap over the nectar when it's been dehydrated, they will use a flat white or clear capping, as you can see towards the top. And then when they're hungry and they need that food, that carbohydrate, they will open that capping to drink the nectar. And there's a frame with part of it is capped. That frame would be put back into the cell, into the hive. You don't want to really capture the honey until at least 80% of that frame is capped, because the nectar that's not been dehydrated enough, if you were to capture it, it would put too much water into your honey, and it could cause you problems. So it's much better you wait until almost 80 to 90% of it is capped. Okay. Now, if you look at this frame, this is all natural beeswax. What a lot of traditional beekeepers do is they use something called foundation, which is a sheet of beeswax that has been produced by someone, and it has the imprint of the hexagon, and they put that into the frame and the bees build it out. I don't like using foundation. A lot of the foundation, when you test it, is full of chemicals, because who knows where they're collecting the beeswax from. And generally in the old days, the cell structure was larger. And if you let the bees build the cell structure by themselves, excuse me, they will build a smaller cell than what would be produced by these manufacturers. Now, they finally have gotten the point that small cell size is better for the bees for a lot of reasons. But so this is all natural comb that the bees have built out. And if you look at it again, it amazes me that every cell is exactly the same size. And these are just bees coming and going. There are guard bees, again, that will protect, not let bees from other hives in. They will also prevent yellow jackets and wasps from coming in. If your hive is strong, they'll be able to kill them and not let them in. A number of years ago, up in New England, or at least in Massachusetts, we always used to get a hard frost sometime in late September. And that would kill off all the yellow jackets, hornets, and wasps. So we never had a real problem. Now that we're in the last 3 to 4 years, we have not had a hard frost until either late October or early November because of climate change. Now, it's a two-edged sword. One, the bees are out working more because it's warm, but the numbers in the hive will decrease that time of year. And so they are generally not as well able to protect the hive from an invasion of wasps and yellow jackets and hornets. And when there's nothing out there for those insects to eat, like pollen and nectar, the next thing they do is they come after the bees because they're meat eaters. Now, a number of years ago, we did a pollinator festival in the fall at Drumlin Farm. And I went to do a hive opening with about 40 people surrounding me. And I thought I was going into one of my strongest hives. And when we opened the hive, it had been attacked by yellow jackets, and they had wiped out the bees and cleared the hive out. And it was full of yellow jackets. So we now have to put up yellow jacket and wasp traps around the farm in the fall to prevent that from happening. I mean, it's just one of the many results of climate change that are affecting us. And here's another little video that kind of gives you a perspective from the bees.
My včely máme úzky vzťah ku kvetom. Opelujeme ich a oni nám na oplátku poskytujú sladký nektár. Je riedky.
So this is from the bee's perspective explaining what they do.
Dávame iným včelám na spracovanie, aby bol skladovateľný.
The photography is unbelievable.
Na vyrobenie 1 kilogramu medu vykonáme viac ako 10 000 letových hodín. S ostatnými včelami v úli sa dorozumievame aj pohybom tela. Kruhovým tancom oznamujeme našim družkám, že nový zdroj nektáru sa
So this is
nachádza
what
blízko.
people talk about as the waggle dance, of how the bees let the other bees know where the good food sources are, where a new home might be,
Ak
things like
tancujeme
that.
do osmičky a pritom sa natriasame, zdroj znášky je vzdialený i viac ako 2 km. Podľa tanca vieme, koľko paliva spotrebujeme na prekonanie tejto vzdialenosti. Les býva pre nás zdrojom sladkej šťavy. Zbierame ju z iličia alebo z listov. Alebo ju odoberáme spolu s mravcami v drobných kvapkách priamo od vošiek. Keď šťavu spracujeme, vznikne chutný, tmavý medovicový med. Naše sladké bohatstvo v úli si chránime aj pred osami, ktoré to nevedia, tie na to doplatia. My včely sme spoločenský hmyz. V úli nás žije okolo 50 000. Včelári nám hovoria robotníci. Vykonávame všetky potrebné práce. Nikto nám prácu neorganizuje. Riadíme sa len pudmi. Čistíme bunky a staviame plásty. Zbierame nektár i pel. Kvetový pel skladujeme v samostatných pelových bunkách. Po zmiešaní s medom ho používame ako výživnú potravu pre naše potomstvo. Sme v neustálom pohybe, ale po 6 týždňoch vynieme na upracovanosť. To by sa vám, ľudia, asi nepáčilo, však. Výsadné postavenie má jediná samička, naša matka. Niektorí z vás jej hovoria kráľovna. Kladením vajíčok do buniek pánstv sa stará o zachovanie nášho rodu.
Again, the photography is amazing to me. So there's a bee egg being placed.
Z vajíčok sa vyvinú larvy, neskôr sa zakuklia a po 21 dňoch sa liahnú v dospelé včely. I hneď pracujú. V lete žije medzi nami aj niekoľko sto samčekov, trúdov. Pária sa s matkou, ktorému sa to podarí, zahynie. Ešte šťastie, že pri ľuďoch je to inak. Ak je nám v úli už veľmi tesno, vyrojíme sa s matkou a s asi polovicou včiel. Cesta roja je neistá, tak si sebou berieme aj potravu. V pôvodnom včelstve vo vybraných materských bunkách krmíme larvy špeciálnou potravou materskou kačičkou. Takto si vychováme novú matku.
So that's a queen
V
being
Dolnskom
born.
úli sa po niekoľkých dňoch z materskej bunky liahne nová matka. Zvláštnym zvukom oznámi svoj nárok na vládu. Vôbec však nie je mieromilovná. Konkurentky usmrtí žiadom skôr, ako sa vyliahnu. Ak to nestihne, nastáva súboj. Ktorá súboj prežije, zasadne na kráľovský trón. V úli staviame z vosku plásty. V 1 kilograme včelieho vosku je zhmotnená energia 7 kilogramov najjemnejšieho medu. Čím viac buniek postavíme, tým viac potomstva v nich môžeme vychovať. Zväčšíme si tým šancu na prežitie. Proti silným sršňom sme bezmocní. Na čerstva si pochutnajú na našom hrudnom svalstve. Nová panenská kráľovna sa musí vydať na svadobný let. Potrebuje získať dostatok samčieho semena na to, aby bola schopná do konca svojho života oplodňovať vajíčka pri ich kladení. Je to riskantné. Musí nájsť miesto, kde sú sústredené trúdy. Oplodňovacie znamienko na konci brúška značí, že jej svadobný let bol úspešný. Do robotničích buniek matka potom denne nakladie tisíce vajíčok. Trúdy si svoj podiel na prosperite úľa už splnili. V období núdze nie sú nám potrební nadbytoční stravníci. Prinútime ich preto opustiť náš úl. Naša matka má pre včelára veľkú hodnotu. Vzácne vlastníctvo treba označiť, aby nedošlo ku nedorozumeniu. Sme pripravené položiť svoj život za život nášho spoločenstva.
So it just amazes me at the photography that they're able to get. So that really shows you what happens in the hive. A lot of beekeepers nowadays keep a lot of hives near each other. Some of us now are, through a natural approach, are really spreading our hives apart just to ensure that if one hive gets sick, it's not going to infect another hive. So at Drumlin Farm, we have our hives spread out all over the place. That really has worked for us. Luckily, we have not had any bear problems yet, though we did have a bear sighting on the property relatively recently. As you know, the woods disappear, the bears are looking for places, and one of them showed up on the farm. Luckily, there were some workmen out there that chased it away before it really attacked one of our hives. And there's a beekeeper getting ready to work in their hive. We all wear protective clothing. Some people will wear gloves and, cover their whole bodies. The only part of my body that I really worry about is my face. Otherwise, I find it too hard to work in these heavy gloves. And, you know, at times I do get stung if I do something wrong. But if you go slowly and are gentle, they generally will not bug you or sting you. Some beekeepers use smoke in a smoker. And what the smoke does is it makes the bees think, oh my God, there's a fire in the woods. We have to pack up and leave. So they start engorging themselves with honey because they think they're going to need a lot of energy to create new housekeeping somewhere. And it allows the beekeeper to go in and do the work they need to do. And then when the smoke dissipates, the bees kind of say, oh, the fireman did a great job, put the fire out. We don't have to leave. I don't actually like using smoke because I don't like exciting the bees like that and making them start to engorge their honey. So I will listen to our hives using a stethoscope. And if the hives sound gentle and calm and the weather is nice, I will use a spray bottle filled with honey water, and I'll spray the bees as I go in and spray the walls. And the bees, because they're so sanitary, will start cleaning everything and cleaning themselves and let me do the inspection I need to do. But again, if the weather is not really great and the bees sound a little agitated, like they have over the last few weeks when we had all these electrical storms, I will use smoke because that really focuses them really heavily into getting ready to leave. Bees collect something called propolis. Propolis is a resin that the trees, they collect from the trees, and it has a number of purposes. One, it's a glue, and they seal every joint, and they will seal the frames into the hive. And as you can see, the beekeeper is using a metal tool to pry that frame out because it's so stuck. It's also an antibiotic, and it helps keep the bees healthier. And some people will collect propolis and mix it and make a tincture that people will take for different health reasons. So, you know, there are a number of products in the hive. Again, this is a very healthy hive. You can see all the bees on one frame. When you add a queen to your hive, or when you're first starting with a package of bees that you'll get, the way these packages are made is the queen that created those bees is not with them. So you have to slowly introduce a new queen to them. So there's a whole process you go through. Otherwise, if you just dump the queen into the hive with those bees, they would kill her. They really have to get used to her and her smell. People will use, there are some diseases that affect the bees, and people will use certain chemicals to treat them. Again, I don't do that at Drumlin. We've been experimenting with a lot of natural approaches to dealing with the problems. The biggest problem that beekeepers are having right now, besides all the chemicals that people are using, are vero mites. And if you look on the back of this bee, there's a round dot towards the head. That is a mite. And mites are very similar to ticks. And they will attach themselves to the bee and feed on their fat, but they also carry viruses. So they're injecting viruses into the bee that's weakening them. Now, some people use chemicals. Again, we don't use chemicals to treat them. We've developed a couple of natural techniques to deal with the mites. And luckily, we've been having some success with that. And again, this is a Langstroth hive.
Mel, we're coming up on, we're having about 20 minutes left.
Okay, thanks. And so the way they capture honey out of the frames is they will scrape the cappings off and put them into a spinner that through centrifugal force throws the honey off into the hive, into the container, and then we filter it and bottle it. Raw honey is non-pasteurized. When you pasteurize honey, a lot of the commercial stuff you find in the supermarket has been pasteurized. Pasteurizing kills all of the good stuff that's in honey. So we don't pasteurize. You don't need to pasteurize it. When you ask why they pasteurize it, they claim it increases the shelf life of the honey. That's a fallacy, because honey will last forever as long as it's in a sealed container. They have pulled honey out of the pyramids that was totally good when they opened the containers. And we think they do it because unpasteurized honey tends to not be as clear, so it doesn't look as clear as the commercial pasteurized honey, but it has a much better taste and it's much healthier for you. And you can see that's filtering and then bottling. And the bees basically stay in the hives over the winter. They look for 45 to 50-degree days to come out and do a bathroom run. They will not go to the bathroom in the hive unless they can't get out. That hasn't really been an issue the last number of years. And if anything, these warmer winters have been really bad for our bees, because the warmer it is, the more food they eat. We used to tell people to keep 60 pounds of honey in the hive over winter to get the bees through. We're now telling people to keep 100 pounds of honey. The average hive in a good year will produce 200 pounds of honey. So you're able to take that surplus, that extra honey, that extra 100 pounds. So why are the pollinators are important to us, and what can we do to help them? Pollinators give the value of created by pollinators in agriculture in the US is $29 billion. And obviously without the pollinators, that would disappear. In parts of China, where because of pollution and all the chemicals that were used, there are no more pollinators. And they have people out in the fields hand pollinating the crops. And I don't think that would ever happen here. I think we'd end up losing what we're eating. Again, the benefits of pollinators is what they do for our fields, besides creating the honey. What we can do is we can limit deforestation and start to reforest some of the areas. We need to do much more diverse farming, which most organic farmers are doing. So that's not really a problem. And most people are not using pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides unless they're more organic and less harmful to the pollinators. There's a lot of research going on, and we need to continue to do that. We need to basically raise the awareness of people of why pollinators and honeybees are really useful and why we need to do things to keep them going. Hobbyist beekeepers have increased over the last 10 years because people are starting to understand how important they are. Some people are saying that during the pandemic, they even increased more. Hopefully it's not like all the people who adopted dogs during the pandemic who are now returning them, but we'll see. And we need the government to start passing some rules about some of this stuff. We need to ban some of these pesticides that are out there that are really hurting the bees and all the other animals out there. And we need to do more things to encourage beekeepers. Otherwise, our farms are going to die. Now, this happens to be a slide of a Halloween festival that's done out at Drumlin where they decorate out in the fields. But I think this slide really gets the point across that unless we stop using all these chemicals and start doing more diverse farms, our farms are going to die and we're going to be in trouble. Save the bees and the farmers. So
that's why they're busy as a bee.
This is a video that was done by a group that really is like a virtual tour of our farm out at Drumlin and all the bees that I think we have enough time to do. Whoops, I gotta go back.
That's why they're busy as a bee.
They take weekends off?
No weekends, no nights, no days.
What?
Hey there, travelers. Today I'm at Mass Audubon's Drumlin Farm Wildlife Sanctuary. They take care of goats, sheep, cows, and a very special animal we're learning about today, honeybees. Meet Mel, beekeeper extraordinaire at Mass Audubon's Drumlin Farm. We hop into his beemobile where he drives us to our first beehive. Mel, this looks like a bee mansion. What am I looking at here?
This is called a Slovinian beehive. The yellow portion is the beehive itself. Looks like a kitchen cabinet. They've developed this kind of lazy man's approach to beekeeping. There are no boxes to lift except when you initially set it up.
Whoa. After starting off in Slovenia, we traveled over to a different hive where we learned about bee behavior.
Can you tell me what kind of beehive I'm looking at here?
So this is called a Warre hive, the hive that replicates what the bees would do in the wild. They would find a tree with an open hole, and they would start building their comb inside the hive from the top down. You don't get as much honey, but not all of us are only interested in the honey. It's also making sure there are a lot more bees out there in the world, since we'll be in a lot of trouble if they disappear.
Mel, I see a lot of bees flying around right now, making me a little nervous. What are they doing?
Well, you shouldn't be nervous. Most of them are probably bees that have recently been born. So what they do is they do orientation flights. They come outside the hive and they'll fly around and they locate the position of the hive based on the position of the sun. They're setting their own internal GPS. And then some of them are just probably warming up and some of them will take off and go looking for flowers, pick up nectar and pollen.
Aw, baby bees. That's adorable. Next, Mel lets us get an insider look into what the busy bees are doing in the hive. So Mel is about to show us Bee Reality TV. We're going to take a look right inside the hive.
The Warre hives have these windows that will open up and you can see inside. You can see the natural honeycomb that they've been building out. Bees secrete little cells of wax from a cell in their head and they shape it with their feet, work together to create the beeswax and make the honeycomb. And then the queen is in there somewhere laying eggs and they're starting to store pollen and nectar to convert to honey.
How long does it take them to make a comb like this?
They could build out a box in a week.
Mel, these bees make me feel lazy.
Well, when you only live 4 to 6 weeks, you got to get a lot of work in during the season. And they'll do every job that the hive has. So when they're first born, they become nurse bees, they become cleaners, so they'll clean the cells out so the queen can lay another egg in it. They'll clean the cells out so that the worker bees who are bringing in the honey, the nectar, can store the nectar. They'll become mortuary bees, so if someone dies in the hive, they will push that out of the hive. They will also clean out cells where an egg might not have developed. They become guard bees where they guard the entrance. So the queen in this hive will spray something called a pheromone, which is like a perfume. And it's got an odor that's very specific to her. And she sprays it across all the bees so that when they go out and they come back, if a bee from another hive try to get in here and the guard bees don't smell, that smell, they're not going to let that bee in.
I didn't know the bees had so many jobs.
So since we're getting close to the end of time, I'm gonna jump away from this.
That's what.
And whoops, stop sharing and open the floor up to any questions that there might be. Now, there is a link to where I have converted this presentation into a PDF if people want to download it. There's also a bibliography list of books that you and other things that you can look at that really will give you a lot more information about it. Okay, so I'll open it up to questions.
Yeah, I have already dropped the link into the chat for everyone who wants to take a look at your bibliography. And then I am now dropping a link into the chat for the PDF version of your slides. Now, there was a question that came in about your treatments for varroa mites. What have you found successful?
Okay, so I use two different treatments. One, a lot of beekeepers use basically oxalic acid, which is an organic compound. But what they do is some people will use some kind of a metal plate tied to electricity, where they put that into the hive with the powder and they vaporize the oxalic acid. Or they'll do a drip approach where they take a cloth and put it on top of the frames and drip the oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is very dangerous stuff. If you breathe, when you do this, you need to use a respirator. So I won't do that. Rhubarb leaves, which anybody who grows rhubarb knows they cut the leaf off and throw it away. Rhubarb leaves have 5 to 6% natural oxalic acid in them. One of the reasons they're thrown away. And I take those rhubarb leaves and I lay them on top of the frames of the brood boxes where the babies are being born. And the bees, because they're so sanitary, will chew through those leaves, releasing the oxalic acid, which knocks down and kills the varroa mites. And within 2 days, that leaf is gone. They have chewed through it and thrown out the little pieces at the entrance. The other thing we do is based on some research done by this guy named Paul Stamets, who I call the godfather of the mushroom world. He went in his backyard one day and realized there was a bunch of mushrooms growing and fungus on the trees, and there was water collected, and the bees were all over it, drinking up this water that whatever's in the mushrooms was leaching into it. And he hooked up with a entomologist from Washington State U, and they started testing these mixtures on the bees. And it turns out that they found that these teas basically made out of the mushroom were reducing the viral loads in the bees to almost zero. Now, we had done some work with a group of Harvard researchers who were doing some work on pesticides and bees, and they took our bee school, and so they would do some testing for me, and found out that the treatments we did on our test hives were reducing the viral loads in the bees to zero. So mites are like ticks. They inject viruses into you. So between those two, we've had a lot of luck with reducing the problems with the mites. And I've actually given a talk at NOFA, I think the winter conference on those approaches and how much success we've had. And we continue to do research. We're now treating all our hives with these approaches, and have had a lot of good luck with it. Okay. Any other questions?
Anyone's welcome to come off of mute and ask your question if you would like to at this moment.
Hi, this is Jan Martin from Rhode Island. Thank you. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Literally, I'm actually going to, after this video, go out and open my hive that I got about 6 weeks ago for the first time. So talk about a newbie. I'm really, really new at this. And while I've seen others do it, I have never done it myself. Any particular suggestions?
How many boxes are on your hive?
Just one. It's a very, it was a swarm that a neighbor with hives had. So we swarmed it. We put it in the box and I've left them alone up to date.
Well, be prepared to put another box on.
Yeah, okay.
Because in theory, have you been seeing a lot of bees coming in and out of the hive a lot?
Yes.
So it's probably built up fairly heavily.
Okay.
And if you don't add a box, they will swarm.
Okay.
Again. Though this is a tough time of year for them to swarm.
Yeah.
They won't have enough time to really build up. So get ready just to add another box and just check to see if there's a lot of brood in there.
Okay.
And if there's not, then you might want to find someone that's raising queens locally and add a queen to the hive.
Okay.
Okay.
Wish me luck.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Have you ever done this before?
No, I have not.
Okay. You have protective equipment?
Pardon me?
You
Yes.
have protective clothing?
I do.
Okay.
You know.
And you might want to use the smoker because it's the first time you're going in.
Yeah. We'll see. You know, I can listen to the hive and tell if they're calm or not.
Well, I walk around with a stethoscope and the kids out at the farm say, "Oh, are you a doctor?" And I say, "Well, I'm a doctor of bees."
Yeah.
And I determine whether I'm going to use my smoker or the spray bottle.
Well, I'm thinking the simpler I make it, the quicker in and out, the better for me. You know, that's all.
You shouldn't need more than 10 minutes in the hive.
Okay, good.
The longer you're in there, the more angry they'll get. So.
Okay, yeah. All right.
And have fun.
Yeah, I will. It's going to be fun. And I'm not one of those people who got one during COVID. I want you to know that. I've been planning on doing this for a long time. I just finally got around to it this year.
Good.
Well, we are right at 10:30, and I want to respect all of your time. So thank you very much for showing up and participating with us. Just before we go, there's a few announcements. We would love your feedback. There's a link here in the chat for you all to check out and tell us how you liked our event. We always try and take a look, and your feedback helps make our programs much better as well.
And the only thing I would add is in the PDF, the last slide has my email address and I think my phone number. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I don't mind at all.
That's great. Yeah. Would you mind, Mel, putting your email in the chat for us?
Sure.
As well, we encourage you to check out our vendor marketplace and in between workshop sessions. The link is in the chat. As well, we hope that you check out our online auction. It has some really excellent items, and check bid often. What is it? Check often, bid frequently. I forget how that goes, but check that out. And then we of course have more workshops coming up for you all. This is first episode, first workshop series, and we've got 2 full days now. So be sure to check out your program book, and that'll have all the up-to-date links that you'll need for the next upcoming workshops. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much again for coming, and from all of us at NOFA Mass, we look forward to seeing you next time.